All right, so let's take a walk through the story of Esther. The story of Esther did not mention God even once. God is hidden in this story, but there is an active and living providence at work here. So, looking deeper at the story, we can see that there's absolutely divine work of God throughout. And it's a story about God's providence, but it's hidden, that he would not be mentioned in the story, that you would have to seek, you have to find him in the story. Where is he working? Where is his covenant being preserved? Where is his redemptive plans being at work? We see God uses the willing and sacrificial heart of Esther and of Mordecai to save the Jews. The story, for me, reflects the sacrifice of our soon coming King, Jesus Christ, who came down and said, essentially, if he perishes, he perishes. So you see, if Ezra was a story of restoration through worship, and Nehemiah, it was a story through restoration, of restoration through rebuilding, Esther is a story about preservation through providence. So a little background about Esther is that Esther was an orphan. She was a Jewish girl who became the queen of Persia and saved the people from a plot to destroy them, saved the Jews from a plot to destroy them. After Esther's parents had passed away, her cousin Mordecai, he took her in and he became her guardian. So in Persia, in Susa, the city of Citadel, this kingdom was all about power and pride and just excess and lavish. The king of Persia in Susa was King Ahasuerus, and the queen was Queen Vashti. The kingdom was, as I said, all about pride, showcasing their unchecked power and indulgence and arrogance. And the king, one of the ways that they display this, that the king would throw a massive feast, a massive party for his officials and his servants. And also the queen Vashti also threw one for the women who belonged to the king. They would have this party separate, like women and men would be separate having this party, and man would just do whatever man wanted to do in this time. So there was a ton of alcohol indulgence, and even the king became drunken. He sent his servant, he sent his 7 eunuchs to bring his queen Vashti to showcase her beauty to princes and all his guests. And the eunuchs were kind of the only men that were allowed in the women's quarter, because they were often castrated foreign slaves. And so by that, they were allowed in the women's quarters. But they were servants of the king. Queen Vashti, however, refused. She refused to be paraded to drunken nobles and enraged king. So she didn't want to be showcased like that. She felt like, essentially, well, the story doesn't tell you what she felt like or what's the reason, but essentially she probably just felt like she was being undermined greatly of where she sits on that throne, that she will become and displayed like a little puppy, you know? But in Persian culture, in those times, this was seen as great disrespect, not only to the king, but they also saw it as a woman rebelling against her husband and man in authority, that she would be showing contempt for him. So this was extremely embarrassing for the king. And for this to happen in front of everyone and other women seeing this at play, then they were concerned, the king and the men were concerned about women acting in this manner, that they would have contempt for their husband, that they would become a new practice in the nation. So they were not going to allow that. So because of Queen Vashti's refusal, the king took counsel with his wise men, and they came up with a new decree, a law, that all women would give honor to their husbands, and that the queen's position should be overtaken, that she should be ripped away from Queen Vashti and be given to a woman that would essentially obey the decree. So this decree was sent to all the king's territories in all languages and over all the provinces. And a ceremony was held for the king to find a new queen. So this is now the story in Esther 2, where Esther rose from this obscurity to royalty. Mordecai, who is the guardian and the cousin of Esther, he got light of all of what was happening. And he decided to bring Esther to Haggai, which is the king's eunuch, who would be responsible or in charge of women and selecting the best candidate to become the new queen, to become the king's new wife. So Mordecai brought Esther to this contest, but he commanded essentially Esther to conceal that she was a Jew. He did not want that to be known. And he didn't want himself also to be known, because he was a Jew, and he did not want him to be known as her kindred. So Esther found favor in the eyes of Haggai, this guy who's selecting the queen for the king. And everyone and the king also found favor in Esther and crowned her the queen, the new queen of Persia. So Mordecai was kind of a worker at the king's gate, and Mordecai overheard two of the king's eunuchs who were just angered about this whole situation. They were angered and not happy about Esther becoming queen, but also they were not happy because the king basically exalted her above them, in a sense. And they started to plot on harming the king. They started to plot to kill King Ahasuerus. So Mordecai informed Esther, who is now the new queen, and she then told the king about this plot from his eunuchs, his two eunuchs who were plotting against him. And she told the king about this in the name of Mordecai. He told him that Mordecai gave her that information. Now, the king sent out investigation and found it to be true what Mordecai said about this plot that these eunuchs were having against the king. And the king became enraged and ordered them to be killed on gallows. Gallows was made from a tree, and it was like basically a spike that somebody would be dropped in. Pretty graphic. But he ordered them to be killed. Now the king kind of became concerned about the loyalty of the people around him. So he decided to exalt a guy by the name of Haman to become basically second rank to him and a watchman over all of his officials. So Haman was exalted to that position, and all the king's servants would have to bow down and show homage to Haman. But Mordecai, at the king's gate, Mordecai refused. He refused because he did not bow down to anyone, being that he was a Jew. I think that this is one of the first evidence that shows homage to God of the Jews. That Mordecai wouldn't bow down to this self-seeking guy this guy who's exalted himself, likely to a position that acting like he's God almost, looking down on all the people, that all of these servants must bow down to him and show him homage because of where he was exalted to. But Mordecai refused. He refused to show that level of homage to him. He wouldn't bow down. And Haman became enraged. He was enraged and he sought to destroy Mordecai. But also, he sought to destroy all the Jews because Mordecai revealed that he was a Jew. Is a part of his reasoning that he told him that he wouldn't bow down, and he revealed that he was a Jew. And this enraged Haman not only against Mordecai but against his people, that all the Jews, that he would try to kill them, destroy them, all the Jews that were in the kingdom under King Ahasuerus. So we see God's character here. We see God is seen through, out, but unseen. You know, God's character here, that he's sovereign without any spotlight, that God would rule even when unseen, that he's faithful in his silence. His absence is not some sort of abandonment, but he is at work. He's at work even when you don't know he's working. He's the master weaver. He turns human decisions into divine design. And he's a covenant protector. He guards his people even in exile, that they wouldn't know that God is working. We see a parallel to the gospel here of Esther and Christ, that Esther's rise foreshadows Christ's rise. This humble beginning, that she was an orphan, that she was she's from obscurity, unknown, but humble beginning, chosen for a greater purpose, and positioned before authority, silent for a time, but then revealed at an appointed moment, just the way Jesus came and just the way Jesus walked. That Jesus too enters the world silently before unveiling his mission. So we see that God is working even when you cannot see him. Obscurity may be preparation, not neglect. Small faithfulness today may rescue many tomorrow. So in Esther 3-4, we see now the threat of this genocide. But we also see God's promise that, so in the month, there's a month, the month of Nisan is a month of Jewish religious calendar, and it's a preparation time to celebrate the Passover and their deliverance from Egypt. We see this in Exodus 12, 1-2. And Haman, preparing for his choices in trying to destroy all the Jew and pursue destruction of Mordecai as well, he was casting lot. And in the Bible, it talks about casting pur. Pur is like casting lot. They roll a dice, essentially. They roll a dice until the month of Adar, which is the 12th month. A month which is supposed to symbolize joy and strength. And it's the Hebrew calendar, which is also the month where the second temple in Jerusalem was completed. So this was an important time and an important month resembling Jewish. You know, I think this also tells us about the nature of Haman and what side of the coin he's on. I think just as much as God not being mentioned in Esther, we have not seen a mention about who is pagan and who isn't. But I think Haman's choices of wanting to destroy the Jews and also destroy the Jews on the month of Adar, you know, this Hebrew calendar, this resemblance about the completion of the second temple, I think this points to him not being a believer of the God of the Jews, that he would be a pagan. and that he would seek to destroy them in such a time. I think this points out exactly why Mordecai would refuse to bow down to him, because he's pagan. He's not of the God of Mordecai. And in so, it is the case. This was a spiritual warfare. This was an ancient enemy. Haman was an Agagite. He was a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and who were ancient enemies of Israel. In Exodus 17, 8 to 16, you can see that being played out there. And Agag was defeated by King Saul, and then he was also killed by the prophet Samuel in 1 Samuel 15, 1 to 33. So Haman and Mordecai's conflict actually mirrors the earlier conflict between their ancestors. It's not random. It's a spiritual warfare. It's a spiritual warfare against the covenant people, against the Jews. So a decree was instructed. A decree was instructed because to show such disrespect in the culture of the Persian culture would mean death. So there was a decree made, instructed to kill and destroy the Jews. That was made, and it was sent to all the provinces of Susa regarding the month of Hadar, that this would happen there. So you see, Satan's strategy is very clear, that Satan wants to destroy the Jews. He wants to erase the messianic line and to prevent redemption. But what the evil meant for evil, the Lord will use for good. So Mordecai became very grieved. He learned about this decree that was made, signed by the king at the time. And when something was signed by the king within that culture, it could never be overturned. So Mordecai learned of the plan, and he became very grieved. We saw the cultural way of showing grief, that he would rip his clothes and he put on sackcloth, and then he would lay in ashes. This was the ancient way to express grief. So himself and the other Jews were grieving. And they were grieving with fasting and weeping and lamenting. So to grieve, and to grieve with fasting, and to grieve with lamenting, and to grieve with weeping, this really shadows the way in which Israel was walking with the Lord through the wilderness. See, so without the expression of God's working, without the expression of God's working hand in the story, it still reflects the repeated format of restoration for Israel's journey with God through the wilderness. This is what we saw, that Israel will fall, or that much will come upon them from enemies, but they would weep, they will see God again, that then God would find a way to restore them. So this time of grieving and weeping and lamenting and fasting and it was a request for God's mercy and intervention, even though he was unseen in the story. So God would find a way always, as he always does, to restore them. So Mordecai sent a word to Esther about what was happening. And he asked that she would use her influence as now the queen, and to go to the king and try to get the king to overturn this decree that was made. But by the customs and the protocols and the culture within Persia, if anyone should enter the king's courts without being called, that would mean death. It would be grievous destruction of them. You would not be allowed into the king's area without being called. For penalty will be death. But Mordecai said to Esther that concerning that situation, because Esther responded saying, well, if I did this, I'm going to die. I'm going to be killed. Like, I'm not allowed. Mordecai said to Esther, well, if you don't help, if help doesn't come from you, it would come from another place. Which other place? What is the belief of Mordecai as a Jew? Of course he's referring to God in here. And he said, here, for such a time as this, essentially, this is the point where it really reflects the gospel, in that in this time, this chosen time, Esther would be used for the greater moment, just as Jesus was. So Mordecai says, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther 4:14. So this would suggest that he's referring to divine help, divine appointment. So Esther grew in courage. She held a feast. She held a feast for the Jews in Susa. She held 2 feasts for the Jews in Susa. And then she subjected herself and all the Jews to have a 3-day fast before they would feast. To fast is to seek divine intervention. So this is telling you that they were surrendering to the divine help of God, that they were seeking God's intervention in this, even though it is not said. So this points to the connection to fast and connect with the Lord. And she became bold and encouraged and courageous. And we know that fasting is like sometimes a spiritual buildup, that the Spirit of God often will come upon you in this time. So she got divine courage here. And she even said, though it's against the law that she should enter the king's area, she said, which is a brilliant and probably one of the most greatest faith statement in the Bible. She says, if I perish, I perish. Whatever happens, happens. But faith in believing that the best would happen because of the divine help, the divine appointment, the seeking of God through fasting. So we see God's character here revealed in the crisis, that God is a defender. He's a defender of his promise, that he will not allow his redemptive plan to fall, not to fail. He's a strengthener of the weak. He empowers unlikely deliverers. He's the righteous judge. He will overturn evil decrees for good. He's a faithful protector. He preserves the seed, preserve the seed of salvation. We see the parallel to the gospel here in the intercession and the sacrifice, that Esther is a type of Christ in the way to the people as Christ was to us, is that she risked death to save her people, that she would intercede before a king, that she will stand between judgment and deliverance. So Jesus does not, Jesus came. He does not risk that. He embraces it. He didn't risk that. He embraces it to save us, to save his people. And this is more just in line with what Esther had done here. So you see, courage often follows fasting and prayer. And God places his people strategically in moments of crisis. Silence in the face of evil is not faithfulness. We are called to expose evil. We are called to expose evil. And here comes the turning point, that this divine reversal will happen. So the king found favor in Esther and allowed her to break protocol, allowed her to come in and make her requests. That, whatever request she wanted, he essentially said she can have up to half of the kingdom. And so Esther's request was to invite the king and Haman, men, to her banquet, to her feast. And Haman, he was excited. He was excited to go to this feast, that the queen would find such honor in him that to invite him to this banquet. But Haman also had another plan. Haman had planned to hang Mordecai. He commanded his officials, he commanded the ones under him to make gallows, make a gallows, actually, a 50 cubic, a very tall one, a very mighty big one. Make it with his plan to hang Mordecai on it. So he planned to tell the king this. But the king, at the knowing about the killing to come of Mordecai, the come of the Jews, he was quite restless. He had a restless night. The king couldn't sleep. He was unable to sleep. So he requested his servants to come and read books to him. The book of the Chronicles, where it is said that it is written in the book of Chronicles about what Mordecai had done, about the time when he saved the king, that he would tell them about the plot against the king early on that we talked about. And there was a book also about memorable deeds. And in that book was the record of what Mordecai had done. But also it showed that Mordecai actually was not honored. He wasn't gifted anything for what he had done. And the king wanted to gift him. So the king wanted to honor Mordecai. And Haman came to make his request. And he wondered who the king found honoring aside from him. Who could the king really want to honor above me, that the king would find favor in such person? To his disappointment, he found out, he learned that this guy that the king wanted to honor was Mordecai, the one he had planned to kill. And Haman, to be second rank under the king, who does the king's work, he was forced to go throughout the nation and proclaiming throughout the city about the king's declaration to honor Mordecai for what he had done. So this was very embarrassing. This was the turning point of the whole book, that judgment fell on the enemies. So we're going to see Haman's fall, and we're going to see Esther's revelation here, that Haman felt so enraged. He was so embarrassed in front of everyone that he mourned with his head covered. His wise man said in Mordecai, said to Haman, the wise man said to Haman, if Mordecai rises, Haman would fall, but it wouldn't overcome Mordecai. So at the banquet, Esther revealed what she wanted, what request she wanted to make. You know, what she had to inform the king about, what he went in and broke protocol about. So she revealed to the king about Haman's plot to destroy and kill the Jewish people, which would include Esther. So Esther then revealed the fact that she is Jew. And she is the queen. So the king was enraged. The king was enraged that Haman, in his own home, would want to kill his own queen, because his plan was to kill all the Jews. That would include the queen. And the King Ahasuerus, so enraged, he ordered the killing of Haman. But he ordered the killing of Haman on the gallows that was made to kill Mordecai. This was a divine irony that was sharpened, a divine irony that, you know, what the evil meant for evil, like your own sword, you know, if you're a man of the sword, you will die by it. This is a divine work here. So we see God's character in this reversal, that God is a reverser of fortunes, that he humbles the proud, and he will lift the faithful, that God is perfectly timed, nothing rushed or late. He's a just judge. He's just. Evil collapses under his own weight. His own weight. We saw this earlier in the story, that the own evil of one's heart would cause them their own demise, their own collapse. God is also a deliverer. He rescues without fail. So we see there's a parallel to the gospel about the greatest reversal here. That the cross is the greatest reversal. That Satan seeks victory, but then is defeated. He believed that the cross, which was seen as a weak way to die, the cross, he saw it as weakness, that was the way to destroy Jesus, to destroy his plan. But the cross became the symbol of the salvation that would save all of us. And not only just save all of us, but he also defeated the grave as he died and rise again. You see, death was conquered. Satan, he came in looking for conquest in death, but it was conquered. Shame becomes glory. Like the cross, like to die on the cross was a shameful thing, but it became the most glorious thing that could have ever happened. So just as Haman falls by his own plot, evil is undone by its own schemes in Christ. So pride always overreaches. God can change anything and everything overnight. Trust God's timing. Even delays serve his purposes. So we're coming out of that, and we're going to be celebrating that the wins. Esther 8-10, the victory, the preservation, the Purim, the celebration. So a new decree was done. We see victory. We see the preservation of God's promises, God's people. A new decree, and Purim, which was the celebration. So Mordecai was exalted. He was exalted over the house of Haman. Mordecai was made to be in the position that Haman was in. Exalted. And then he grew even more powerful and more influential than Haman was ever. The decree was rewritten because it could not be erased. But the decree was rewritten under the signing of the king. The king seal would mean that it would be finished. It's done. So the new decree was that the Jews would be allowed to destroy and kill everyone throughout all the provinces under King Ahasuerus, who would seek to harm them, that they could defend themselves and kill anybody who would seek to destroy them. So this also would be done in the month of Adar, the same month that was planned and plotted to end the Jews on, that they would use that for their victory. So the Jews actually killed like 500 men and also killed the 10 sons of Haman. Haman had 10 sons. They were also killed on gallows. So this was a reversal of genocide on Haman's line. Haman's genealogy. Complete genocide of them. What was planned for evil? He planned genocide on God's people, but that was overturned, reversed, genocide on his own. So this was meant for Jew. Now a lot was called Pur, as we said before. This was for deciding on when to kill the Jews, but the reversal occurred after the Jews destroyed their enemies, that they would celebrate, have a holy celebrated day, a holiday, which would now be named Purim. And that name came from lot, the casting lot. So the celebration of casting lot, but the winning and the exalted winning of the Jews here. That the Jews once was despised, but now exalted. You see, God character here is that he is a covenant keeper, that he preserves Israel for the Messiah, that he's a joy giver, that the mourning will turn to celebration, that he's a victorious savior, that he secures lasting deliverance, and that he's faithful through generation, that his promises will endure and they will endure forever. And we see the gospel here, the tie into the gospel is that, Purim, the celebration about casting lot and the death of Jesus. There is a tie in here that foreshadows that salvation from destruction, celebration from deliverance, that remembrance of victory. That there's a revelation in Revelation that shows the final Purim, the final celebration, that God's enemies were defeated, that his people protected, that there is eternal joy established. So let's close it off. Esther is the book where God is unseen, but unstoppable. That evil seems dominant, but is actually doomed. That courage releases deliverance. That silence gives a way to salvation. It teaches us that God is never absent, only hidden, that timing is everything, that courage changes history, that the Messiah's line cannot be destroyed, that Esther preserves the people, Ezra restored worship, Nehemiah rebuilds walls, but Christ fulfills them all. So Esther ends with victory and celebration. Revelation ends with eternal triumph. Behind every hidden moment stands a faithful God. Behind every threatened promise stands a victorious Christ. Thanks be to God.